Today's talk is about 8 ways to bring a product to market without ever getting FDA approval. Now, if you're a consumer, one of the things you should be thinking about is, doesn't the FDA protect me? And that's a very valid question to ask. So what we're going to start by talking about is, why would the FDA let products come to market without approval?
This is the Darshan Talks podcast, regulatory guy, irregular podcast with host Darshan Kulkarni. You can find the show on Twitter at Darshan Talks or the show's website at darshantalks.com.
So there are a variety of reasons for that. So the number one reason is the fact that the FDA is trying to balance innovation against safety. And you can always aim for more safety, but it comes at the price of approvals. And it comes at the price of innovation. And it comes at the price of when are you sacrificing innovation for that safety? Another reason might be it's just duplication, because someone else has already done the work. A third reason might be it's part of the practice already, and the risks that have been observed are minimal. So there are a variety of reasons to get into it, and we'll talk about each one of them for a variety of them. Let's start by thinking of the first one. And the first one is dietary supplements. So dietary supplements are your ginkgo or your ginseng or anything like that. And the FDA has basically been told by Congress to think of them as foods and not as drugs. And since they're thought of as foods, what you start thinking about is, okay, do I need to regulate foods in the same way that you regulate drugs? The answer is no. The FDA has come to the balance that as long as you don't make certain claims, so things like you don't get to say you improve heart rate or it improves your heart disease within certain limits, and it depends on the type of claim you're making. In those specific instances, dietary supplements can be brought to market without pre-FDA approval. So the advantage of that, obviously, is you can come to market quicker. The disadvantage is that you're competing against other products that can do the same thing. So competition can come on pretty quickly as well. There are certain opportunities. The big opportunity is the fact that the dietary market is huge. It's in the billions of dollars. And the threat, again, being you're not going to be the only player there. So does that make sense for you to be playing in a space where you've got a lot of competition? So then the alternative, another option of not getting FDA approval, are OTC drugs. So OTC drugs, there are one of two pathways that you can actually bring a product to market for OTC drugs. One is you actually go down the exact same prescription drug pathway called the NDA pathway. The alternative is going down the OTC monograph pathway. The OTC monograph pathway really talks about, okay, we've got like this list of products that we think, as long as you meet these conditions, as long as you make these claims, you can just bring your product to market. You don't need FDA approval. You come on just by notifying the FDA that you're doing so. Another one is compounding pharmacies. Now, compounding pharmacies are interesting. The reason they're interesting is because compounding pharmacies don't actually need to notify the FDA. They notify the FDA that they're doing and are going to be compounding. However, they don't need to tell the FDA specifically what they're making until after the fact. The advantage of this is obviously you can come to market a lot quicker. You can be making more drugs. One of the big reasons compounding pharmacies got this flexibility is because they found that there are so many drugs in shortages, and compounding pharmacies became a nice quote-unquote safety valve. Unfortunately, there have been many deaths, over 60 deaths from the NECC tragedy itself. There have been many concerns because the FDA has been inspecting these facilities, and they've found significant findings in the vast majority of them. So it becomes hugely problematic. Additionally, compounding pharmacies are primarily regulated by the state boards of pharmacy. However, the US FDA does have jurisdiction depending on if it's what's called a 503A or 503B facility. And then there's the issue that kind of goes with it is you need a pharmacist overseeing the process. Then there are certain biologics. Now that should surprise a lot of people. How are biologics not subject to the same controls that you would expect? So it depends on the type of biologic. There's something called a 351 HCTP and a 361 HCTP. It's the 361 HCTP that I'm thinking of. And it has to meet a bunch of different conditions. So if it's going from your body back to the same place in your body for the exact same reason, and you're not quote unquote, not doing more than minimal manipulation, and there are a few other conditions, the FDA will say, you just need to let us know that you're doing it. And the FDA is not required to regulate or control it from there. What's next? You can start looking at the 510K pathway for medical devices. The 510K pathway is interesting because, again, like in the case of drugs, you do need approval, and those are primarily for devices that have not been seen before. However, if they have been seen before, it really makes very little sense for the FDA to spend its resources trying to reevaluate a medical device that is going to be effectively similar to one that already existed. So you need to have what's called a predicate device. And then there are certain devices that are quote unquote 510K exempt, which means that you don't even need to go through that process because they're such a small risk. Like, for example, toothbrushes are considered to be 510K exempt, I believe. Then there's cannabis. And right now we all know that cannabis is getting a lot of attention. And since it's getting a lot of this attention, a lot of people are trying to get in. And you can make medical claims with cannabis depending on if you are compliant with state law. There are, however, also cannabis-based products like Epidiolex that are FDA approved, or cannabis-like products, because there are a few others as well. So that's something to consider and think about as you continue, because you don't need to, again, go through FDA approval for that. The big advantages you can come on, there's a huge market, it's untapped. There are loads of risks. The big risk being that it's actually technically illegal at the federal level. I know some of you are thinking of the Farm Act. We can talk about the Farm Act. Feel free to reach out to me. Feel free to subscribe. I'm going to have some conversations about the Farm Act, the Farm Bill, if you will. There are also additional considerations. There's the fact that you can only make certain types of claims, not for other claims. And then, again, there's prosecutorial risks. Then you can start thinking about cosmetics. And when you think of cosmetics, you're seeing people and companies make claims like anti-aging. You're seeing people make claims like removes wrinkles. And that's when you start getting worried because you're making drug-like claims. Some cosmetics companies try to say that we are cosmeceuticals, and the FDA does not recognize that term. You're either a cosmetic or a drug or a device, or you might be a combination, but a cosmeceutical or a nutraceutical is not a combination the FDA recognizes. And then there are what I refer to as ENDS products for nicotine. So for those people who are trying to transition off tobacco and are trying to move towards not smoking, theoretically, ENDS products could be used. The FDA is putting a ton of new information out there about how they want to regulate ENDS products. Stay tuned. We'll probably have some more conversations about that as well. They put out a guidance on it recently as well. There have been several court hearings about this as well. And the FDA itself is changing the timelines. So there are tons of risks if you get into it. However, at this moment, there are certain types of FDA products that were deemed to be, that were deemed products, if you will, have not required FDA approval. That will change in the next 2 years. So stay tuned for that as well. And that should get us to an initial thought. What is your thought process? Do you think you need FDA approval? You should have FDA approval for each of these processes? Stay tuned. I'd love to hear more. Comment below. Subscribe. Thanks again, guys.
This is the Darshan Talks podcast. Regulatory guy, irregular podcast with host Darshan Kulkarni. You can find the show on Twitter at Darshan Talks or the show's website at darshantalks.com.